Welcome to the Feltrinelli Broken City Feltrinelli Camp, a two-day workshop dedicated to the challenges and opportunity that our cities are facing, economical, social, most of all, because these are the aspects more affected by the pandemic, as we know. One sign of our broken cities is the low turnout that we had in the last municipal election, as we know, and that lack of interest of 1 out of 2 voters, that lack of the growing lack of interest in the leader of our cities is a sign of distrust. And political leaders are already archiving it. So, as we do with things that don't matter, but people want to matter. So, they want their city to become cities of opportunities. And this workshop is a call to rethink models and practice that can play a key role in shaping our city, in shaping cities where for healthy community, for a community where social justice is in the center of this city. And Broken City, as you know, is organized by Fondazione Feltrinelli, and is a call to on international experts to provide promote a hybrid culture that we can that is able to understand the complexity of our time and also offer solution that is not easy. We know the goal of Broken City is to offer some best of academic thought and share it with people. And hopefully provide also inspiration for policymakers and practitioners involved in the urban development at any level, regional, local, national, European, at any level. So let's start. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm pleased to invite on the stage Massimo Bricocoli of the Politecnico University of Milan. Nice to meet you. He's the director of DAStU, the Department of Architecture and Urban Studies, one of the most important centers in Italy on this issue. And join us remotely, we have Joan Subirats, political scientist of Autonomous University of Barcelona that cooperates with the Feltrinelli Foundation on issue of urban development. Hi.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good
Nice
morning.
to meet you. Thank you to you both, Professor, for joining us. You will help us to introduce us to the work of Feltrinelli Foundation, and in particular, show the research path of the Observatory on Cities and Urban Transformation, that you know. Broken Cities is a crucial step of this. There are two key activities that the Observatory carry out this year at the national and the European level, whose results and proposals are the starting point of this camp. So, Professor Bricocoli, this year your department worked with the Observatory Foundation on the Scenario Open Lab. Could you please tell us more about this activity and also the result of this lab?
Okay. So thank you very much for the invitation. I'm glad and honored to welcome you and to start these 2 days of intense discussion. I was reading again the program of these 2 days. I think it's a really challenging and an ambitious program because starting from the title, Broken Cities, and from the aim which is declared, which is literally how to repair the social and environmental fractures of cities and territories. So I think repairing and recombining, it's really a very ambitious goal. And also I was impressed yesterday evening. I thought we are using the term broken cities. I wondered also where it comes from. Maybe someone from the foundation will tell us later. And I searched on Google, and I found out that Broken City, the first thing that comes out is a movie, a thriller from 2013, directed by Alan Hughes, with Russell Crowe and Catherine Zeta-Jones. And I think it really was seeing. I couldn't see it yesterday. I couldn't watch it yesterday evening, but I think it has some connections with what we will be discussing. And I repeat, I think it's an ambitious title, an ambitious task for these 2 days, because the pandemic has been exacerbating, accelerating, making more evident, giving evidence to problems we were already aware of. Many of them were, we would have called them like this is the title of a major program of our department, a major research project funded by the Ministry for Research at the Department of Architecture and Urban Studies, which is on territorial fragilities. But if we discuss about broken cities, it's really a push to work on issues which are beyond fragility. There was something which broke up. And I think this is really something we should take seriously. And I will have 3 points also to offer to the work in these days. The first is, as you mentioned, that the work of the tables, the working tables, which will see the, let's say, the very active part of this camp, has been prepared by what was called Scenario Open Lab, which consisted of a series of 3 different workshops, which I coordinated with Laura Saija from the University of Catania and with Marco Lanzato from the University of Roma 3. We were involved as a scientific committee, but we worked together with the researchers from Feltrinelli Foundation. And the workshops were organized with 3 different steps. The first step was identifying trends and scenarios with a focus on worst case and best case. So designing scenarios of development on the different issues. And considering a worst case, so if nothing happens, this is what will result. On the contrary, how can we provide policies, actions, projects that can contrast these developments, so have a best scenario. The second workshop was mainly based on actors and on actions, so collecting also cases, practices, best practices that we can consider so good that we can even start to criticize them. Best practices are made to identify actions which are relevant, interesting, but also to identify weak points, things that can be improved. And then the legacy. The third workshop was mainly aimed at structuring the work of the camp. And I would say there are 3 different, so it's difficult to make a synthesis, but there are 3 different points which I think were emerging in a very interesting way. The first is the role of the public administration, which few years ago would not be a topic, and now was clearly a very core issue. The capacity to look at the territory considering the large cities. So when we say broken cities, we refer to cities, but we have to be aware that there are territories with middle-sized cities, small towns, no towns at all, because it's a shrinking area and you have the population. So this is really something which we always consider. And the third, I would say, the role of technology. The risk that technology, especially on green policies, takes the lead and doesn't consider the local context. So these are, I think, are general issues. And this has been, the discussion was targeting urban and territorial development. So this, then you can see a correspondence with the 6 tables that have been organized. So urban and territorial development, and the focus on public administration and the role of local communities. Social justice, with a specific focus on access to housing and also on competition among territories and cities. And ecological transition, with a focus on the counter effects of sustainability policies. So everything which is for green cities, smart cities, and tends to create an ideal city where everybody has access to good quality of life. In fact, there are already evidences in research that these policies may tend to create further inequalities inside cities. And so these are the basic issues, basic topics which have been creating the food, the reference, the cases for the working tables of these 2 days camp. And what was very relevant, and I think you can also see it in the organization of the camp, is that it's not only academic research. It was really, really relevant to have in the workshops and in the table, I would say, academics, scholars, who have maybe a distance sometimes from the local context, activists and politicians. And it was especially with the politicians, local politicians, that we had this chance to understand something more about the relation between public administration and local communities. And I think this is really important to stress, and it's also the reason why for us as university departments it is important and interesting to work with the Feltrinelli Foundation, because this is an arena in which we can bring our knowledge but also put it on a public stage and discussing with other forms of knowledge. And I have 2 remarks, 2 recommendations two wishes, I would say, for the working groups. The first is to consider that when we discussed in the 3 workshops in the Open Scenario Labs, the Recovery Fund, the Italian PNRR were already a topic. But I think more and more we should be aware that we are discussing about broken cities in the face of very consistent resources. So the issue of how this recovery fund, these plans will be implemented, it's really relevant, because it's evident that these resources could help to solve some problems, but could also reproduce inequalities and even increase some of them in some cases. So I really wish that this is a topic for the working groups. And the third is really another wish that I hope that in the tables, in the working tables, especially because there are many young European scholars and practitioners and activists, I hope that you will be radical. I remember that I learned some years ago that the horror of the, in English is, the minimum common denominator, which of course is, can be the result of mediation, and it's good, it's the point on which everybody can agree. But there are if we discuss about broken cities, we also need radical solutions. So in a working group, it's very typical, then you adjust and you come to a common understanding. But it's the risk of producing a very standard and to move into mediocrity of solutions which may turn out to look obvious. And I would wish that the result of these 2 days is not obvious solutions and quite radical suggestions.
Thank you so much, Professor Bricocoli. It's very interesting also the link you mentioned about the huge resource that we have. So it's a very important, crucial moment, because never before there were such a huge amount of money that could be used to do this innovation in cities. And the result of your research, of your lab, of your initiative, Scenario Open Lab initiative, have been shared also in Barcelona last September during the workshop OK Europe. And And there were also there academics, not only academics, but also practitioners, activists, administrator. So it was another arena where different voices could confront and dialogue. I'd like now to ask Professor Subirats, that is with us in remote, if you can just present the main results of this event you had in Barcelona. What were the step ahead you made after the lab in Italy? So you just take some results and you went ahead with that. So could you please tell us the main result you achieved? Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm glad to be here to share with you these results of our workshop, this interesting workshop that we had in Barcelona 2 weeks ago in September 22. It was made up of academics, policymakers, and also activists, with a very diverse profile, no? From philosophy, anthropology, sociology, architecture, political science, geography, etc. It was a very plural vision. It was organized by the Feltrinelli Foundation with the collaboration with the local partner that was the Institute of Government and Public Policy from the Autonomous University of Barcelona. We had Saskia Sassen as a keynote speaker at the beginning of the session, and she was invited to give us an inspirational talk on how urban realities have changed and the challenges that lie ahead. She highlighted many different issues. For example, from urban activism to the role of and importance of the local or informal economies on the global market. This was particularly important from a metropolitan perspective. She highlighted that we may be living in an era that is witnessing the emergence of a new kind of a city that is characterized as a player on the global stage and with a strong city-to-city collaboration that is often promoted by the international city networks and experiences like that. The workshop of Barcelona was the first one of a series of workshops that the next will be organized by Feltrinelli Foundation. The next will be in Paris, in Brussels, and in Berlin in the next 3 or 4 weeks. I mean, in that sense, the idea is to combine and to share local perspectives and also a perspective from different European cities, that share a lot of the same kind of problems. This inspirational talk opened a 4-hour debate between participants on how these new emerging cities could face the challenge of ensuring a city for all and reducing pre-existing regional disparities. During the debate, it is worth highlighting the need to foster a new territorial scale for taking decisions and policy making that understands the actual city where we live, a city where we often have to cross intercity borders to work, play sports, for example, or go to a university. This new scale fits perfectly with the metropolitan space and can offer both policymakers and citizens in order to create an inclusive and sustainable urban reality. We have talked a lot about the importance of this metropolitan scale, considering that there exist a lot of inequalities inside for example, in the case of Barcelona, in the case of metropolitan Barcelona is a very small city, if you want, just 100 kilometers, with 1.6 million people. That means that probably Paris, Barcelona and Paris, they are the most densified cities in Europe. But if you talk about metropolitan area, it's 350 square kilometers with a 3.5 million people. And the disparities between cities are also very, very important. I mean, in that sense, this workshop talk about center and periphery, no? And I think it's very important to understand that. For example, Barcelona has more or less 200 euros per person as a budget every year. And Santa Coloma or Badalona, that are very close cities, very big cities with 200,000 people, they have just 90 euros per person in exactly the same metropolitan area. I think it's very important to understand the big difference efforts that cross this metropolitan reality. We have concluded the workshop by proposing a set of proposals that we summarize in 4 main points. First, the need to strengthen the capacity of local government with resources and instruments to allow intervention on issues such, especially housing. Housing is a very important issue in our case because Barcelona has a very small part of public housing, just 1.5, no? That is a long way ago from Paris, from Berlin, from Vienna, and I think it's very important for young people, for example, the capacity to have a house, to emancipate, etc. We have a very, I think, like Italy, is a very difficult time for young people to emancipate. No? In the average age in Barcelona is 30 years. It's it's a very complicated way to have enough money to have their own house. No? The second element is to strengthen public, social, and private and community cooperation with the public administration, because the public administration alone, it's very difficult to put that cannot act. The third element is the creation of a pact between different social actors that allows us to overcome the short-termism. This short-termism, it's one of the problems in this situation. And the fourth and the last one is the need to start from a transversal focus of the problems, urban policies, and to need to make a leap of scale in urban policies. I think the relationship, in order to have the appropriate scale to solve urban problems, has to combine with the idea of space, with the idea of identity, and with the idea of power. No? Scale, space, identity, and power, they were the 4 elements that we have to combine in order to try to solve these urban problems that we are now focusing. Thank you very much. That was the most important element of the workshop in Barcelona. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Subirats. Thank you so much, Professor Bricocoli. We leave you to the rest, to get on with the rest of your day. And now we start the open session about the plenaria, about the course issue of the day, how to heal the broken city. Heal the broken city by reconciling the social division. And we know that cities are places where all problems such as unemployment, poverty, and social division are felt more than in the rest of territories. And segregation and poverty are concentrated in big cities normally. Social reconnection is one, after the pandemic now, is an urgent priority. So the question is how to turn the threats into positive challenges. And I am delighted to invite onto the stage Francesca Gelli, Professor of Political Science at the IUAV University of Venice, and Laura Saija, Professor of Cities and Regional Planning at the University of Catania, and Lorenzo Kihlgren Grandi, Professor of City Diplomacy at Sciences Po, and he chairs also a Parisian think tank, Urban Flag, and is author also of City Diplomacy. And nice to meet you all. Thank you for joining us. And also join us remotely. We have Tuna Tasan-Kok. Hello. Hello, Professor Tasan-Kok. She's a urban social geographer and planner and professor of urban governance and planning at the University of Amsterdam. Thanks to all for joining us. And we start with you, Professor Tasan-Kok. In a cities of opportunity, the most basic one is the access to housing. And the influence of financial capital, unfortunately, on large cities is now so widespread that it has boosted the value of houses as an asset on which to invest, rather than something that is a value because it's a response to a need. So, what measure can we take to guarantee everyone the right to housing? Professor, I could see her, but maybe she's not connected with us. Let's try. I can start with someone else, okay? So let's talk. Okay, Professor Kok. Okay, so did you hear me while?
Yes, I did hear you.
Okay, so my question. Okay, thanks. You can go.
But I didn't hear your question.
Right.
I only
okay.
heard you introduce
My question
me.
is, what measure can we take to guarantee everyone the right to housing? As now, more and more in big city, the house is not anymore a value for a response to a need, but rather something to invest on because of financial capitalism. Okay. So how to come back to a house that is a response to a need, that to guarantee this right to everybody? Did you get it? Can you hear me?
I hear you now. I heard your question, but then there was a bit of a cutoff.
Okay, just ask.
So, yes, thank you. I heard your question.
Okay.
Is it the point where I'm giving my reflection?
Exactly.
Yes, thank you. Good morning. Well, first of all, thank you very much for this kind invitation. I'm very happy to be here today, though I wish I really was in Milan right now. Before going into your question, I would like to start by highlighting that one of the biggest consequences of neoliberalism is that city building has become a joint activity of a huge variety of actors who aim to reach their decentralized goals through individualism and entrepreneurialism. So, of course, I see the housing problem from this very large perspective. So while projects, residential projects or other projects mushroom randomly and speculatively in cities, we also feel the shift from a well-coordinated and comprehensive planning approaches towards more fragmented and spatial governance approaches. In this fragmented governance landscape, local governments try to establish connections between these disintegrated efforts also to produce housing and reflectively regulate increasing challenges as they emerge. So in my view, what breaks the city and what creates problems for housing production and access to housing is not just the forces of neoliberalism, but also this lack of overview and the inability to see the forest before the trees, let's say. In this form, city building is not only shaped by companies, but also public sector agencies, citizens who also all act like entrepreneurs. So these tendencies increase already existing inequalities in cities and making housing unevenly accessible. Take Amsterdam, for instance, which is also known as a just city in reference to Susan Feinstein's fantastic work. It has been doing relatively well to balance inequalities created by financialization, speculation, and property-driven urban development, thanks to its public land ownership, social housing, spatial planning, and other welfarist traditions. However, even in a city as such, there are growing issues of housing accessibility. The city has become inaccessible for middle-income groups, not only because of the unavailability of affordable housing, but also access to city requires established networks, social connections, and access to well-paying jobs. So the city of Amsterdam tries to solve this growing problem by issuing new regulations and setting numeric targets to produce new affordable housing stock. But as a result, residential projects pop up everywhere, almost trying to catch up with the speed of the crisis. But the COVID pandemic also increased and nuanced these challenges, which resulted in families moving out to the hinterland and transmitting already existing issues in the core to the periphery. Of course, we heard that the prices in Barcelona also increase in the metropolitan area and living conditions, and the same goes for Amsterdam. So statistics show that the population of Amsterdam decreased since April 2020 because people are moving out to the peripheries. So I think you have the picture, and I don't want to go further on these negative dynamics, but in the remaining few minutes, I want to focus on my view on how we can heal these problems. So I see the problem of I see the answer in fostering a more comprehensive local governance system backed by government funding. I see the answer in a more interconnected planning perspective that will enable us to see a wider picture. Inaccessibility to the city is not only because of the unavailability of housing, it is also because of not efficiently using public infrastructure to enable people to travel quickly and affordably to their work. It requires regional scale thinking and infrastructure. It requires to have local regulatory powers backed by central government strategies and funding. I can really see the need for a governance infrastructure that links and enables the local governments to engage with diverse actors, coalitions, and networks, seeking to influence emerging reforms not only in the core city, but in the whole metropolitan area or regional area. But I also see the need for transformative practices in this governance landscape for a more inclusive and just urban development agenda. Transformative practices create interlinkages in spatial organization to transfer the experiences to larger policy frameworks. These interlinkages can provide platforms not only to accommodate disagreements, but also to enable the inclusion of passive and excluded voices. These interlinkages should be established under the conditions that a well-equipped planning system with a long-term vision and political commitment to fight systemic inequalities are clearly stated as main policy targets. In short, I guess, I argue that we cannot solve the growing inequalities and access to housing problem and new divisions in the cities without having transformative meta-governance infrastructure to enable these critical interlinkages. I think I will stop here and look forward to the discussion.
Thank you so much, Professor Tasan-Kok. Francesca Gelli. In a cities of opportunity, it's also important that people have a say in planning. How can we reconfigure the citizen-city relationship from below? That's one of your issue of study. And also, which is the role of a participatory process in recomposing the relationship between citizen, city, and policymakers?
Okay. Good morning to you all. First of all, please let me say that I'm in doubt. Really? Probably the how of your question is an uneasy task for me. I think that we are facing shifting involvements in participatory processes. In designing and organizing participatory processes, we should take into consideration that we have to do with people commitment, engagement, interaction, and the technical cogitation, the analysis, planning. And what is happening during the last years is that more and more we are concerned with the methodological, organizational, technical aspect of the designing participatory processes, and less with the psychological implication of participation. With the, yes, I'm going to the point, of course. Now, the increasing technicalization of participation processes operated by professionals has led, from my point of view, as a consequence, to a kind of overestimation of the representation of stakeholder interests, goals, and so on, with the risk of underestimating or underrepresenting affectivity, the emotional sphere. Which is really a curious thing if you have in mind the scientists of the internet, those men who are working on the monetization of social media and so on. Okay, they take care a lot about persuasive psychology, and they applied to technologies. And it's really strange that in dealing with participatory processes and social interaction, we removed passions from the scene. And okay, it's true that passions are not easy to be managed. They are impetuous, strong, sudden. But when passions find a representation in public arenas for citizen participation, people can learn and understand how they differently feel, how they differently live, and not only what they differently want. By participating, I discover that your problem is or is not my problem, or that we have different perceptions of problems and opportunities. And this has a lot to do with the concrete consideration of disparities, the knowledge of differences and the existing inequalities. So public participation has a special power, that of representing and inquiring people's passions, motivations, beliefs, and conflicts. So my first critical point is why are we removing the affectivity, and all the emotional sphere from public participation? Why we have this habit of professionalizing, and construct so technical devices to govern participation? Another point may be that public participation should talk about the uncomfortable topics more than the comfortable one, the troublesome subject of the public agenda, making the invisible visible, saying the unspoken, giving voice to marginalities, challenging the status quo. Now, if my research work give evidence that the participation has led the crucial topics of the public agenda. There is an increasing amount of participatory processes, which are all interesting, of course, or useful, but many times, if we inquire the kind of topic that they inquire, they debate, well, they are not the crucial issues. Sometimes inequalities are out of the agenda of public participation. Not sometimes, many times. So I think that this is a problem.
So you mean that participation on what? So on what it depends on what are your desires, your perceptions. So the agenda doesn't take care of the background of the issue that are on the table.
No, the first point is about the problem of don't giving the representation of passions, emotions of people within the arena of public participation. Public participation can be so useful to this goal. And participation has the power of representing social problems. So it's funny to have so technical management of participation, no? With risk of an underestimation of passions. Okay, this is a kind of depotentialization of participation. But I was speaking now about another point, that the public participation should be focusing on the crucial issues of the political agenda. For instance, to give you an example, if we analyze the Italian recovery plan, I need to use a metaphor to give you the idea of what is going on. Probably you have noticed of the new giant Chinese cargo up to 2,000 tons navigating at zero emission, but it will transport coal. This is a paradox. Now, in the recovery plan, we find the participation. We have a big space for participating, but what we are transporting, what kind of ideas, what kind of visions of the future development. We have a lot of different things without a public discourse. So we can speak of all. And it is secondary that we reduce participation to a very short time. For instance, we applied the new procedure of the public debate for the big infrastructures. In Italy now, it is meant to have a duration of 1 month. We know that for a débat public in France, they need 8 months. So, but this is not, to me, the most relevant aspect.
That's procedure.
Yes, the problem is that we are transporting coal with the social dilemmas, no? The social issues, and the inequalities. So the participation is missing the historical role of participation, no? To talk about the unspoken, to say the uncomfortable things, as I was saying to you, not to give visibility to what is invisible. And so this is basically why I am so in doubt.
Okay. So we have to come back to the original meaning of participation, because it's not just any kind of participation that is reaching the goal. It doesn't. Okay, it's an interesting suggestion that you give. Thanks. Now I'd like to talk to Laura Saija. And shifting to social and environment fractures between cities and territory. How can we repair this fracture between cities and territories, being their deprived neighbors or countryside, national capital or Europe, so every kind of territories. It's a very large question, I know. Anyway, you can concentrate on what you prefer.
Sure. And I can't say I have doubts because otherwise we're going to be in troubles. I agree with what Francesca said about participation. So I want to say something. I want to take Massimo Bricocoli's call to be radical, and compared to what I prepared, I'm going to, push my point a little bit further. And I want to also say that some of these reflections come from, having played the role of action researcher for 20 years with both metro communities, rural communities, both in Italy and the United States, and helping communities developing, in some cases, radical practices. And I could be here saying, this is what you have to do. This is what we have done. Like, we've done great things. Today, I want to say something different. I want all of us to ask ourselves, and we have been looking for virtuous practices, radical practices that are doing the right things, that are trying to address fractures, as you said. We need to ask ourselves, really, these practices, how transformative are. And I'm using transformative in the meaning that, the first speaker has proposed. So whatever boundary you take within one neighborhood, one city, today we're probably challenged to get these boundaries a little bit larger. We need to convince cities that they need to reconnect with the rural areas, which probably means for the Italian government that they need to stop looking at inland regions separate from metro areas, allocating, the big money on big cities and coins for the inland areas. We need to redraw our boundaries, definitely, and this is, my first point. But we also need to be honest with each other, and we've been looking for virtuous practices over, the work that we have done with Massimo and Marco and Marianna with Scenario Lab. And we have in this very room a lot of people that are doing the right things. They are trying to address, repair fractures, bridging divides. There are amazing people in this room. How transformative are we, really? And I want to refer to an article from 2019 from two colleagues, Savini and Bertolini, two brilliant Italian minds that are overseas, like often happen, who writes an article about niches, and they look at, bottom-up practices, and they say,
Nietzsche, the philosopher?
No, niches, ecological niches, is an ecological concept. And they say, there are a lot of, good, radical, transformative practices, but they are niches. And so many of them either die, they don't last, they remain marginalized, they get corrupted, assimilated by the status quo, they lose their radical soul. So very few of them are really transformative. And this is how I interpreted the term that was used by the first speaker. How many of us feel we are really changing the status quo? The incredible work we're doing, not sleeping at night, because, I know there are administrators in this room that are, fighting against the people in the administrative structures. And I also want to argue that Bertolini and Savini's article, the concept of ecological niches, they refer to bottom-up, community-based practices. I think this very concept applied to courageous elected officials that, are in office for 3-4 years. They try to do the right things, and it's so hard to change what Lanzaras defined institutional cognitive complexity. And the reason why I want to refer to Lanzaras' concept is because there's going to be a lot of money in the hands of these officials, the good ones and the bad ones, the lazy ones, the courageous ones. It's about time to have programs that deal with institutional cognitive complexity more directly. Otherwise, this is going to end very badly, very, very, very badly. So what does that mean? And this is what I would like for the tables, the working tables. Like, I'm going to give you the problem, then you're going to find the solution. What is going to take for these institutional organizations that, you know, they're going to go after the big money that are becoming available, not just in Italy, like every European country, in the United States, there's recovery money available. This can go very badly unless we identify those niches and we really support virtuous, radical, courageous practices to really stay transformative. Otherwise, even these people that are doing the right thing are not going to be enough. And in order to do that, and I'm going to, you know, say something maybe unpopular, we might need to stop really talking about ideas. We need to get our hands dirty. And this is a big call for philanthropy, like an organization like Feltrinelli. Public universities, if we stop chasing the entrepreneurial dreams, we need to support what's going on the ground, developing an ability to build knowledge through action. And, you know, for those who know me, they know what this comes from, with the aim of supporting what is out there that deserve our attention. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. It's a strong call on action.
Yes.
Yeah. We keep it, and we go on with Professor Kihlgren Grandi. This transformative action is very, very important for your city diplomacy. I'd like to ask you, to what extent are cities able to act independently and of their governments and also at home and abroad? And also, how can city alliances give answer to the pandemic crisis and act in view of common recovery strategies?
Thank you very much. It is a pleasure to be here and share the stage with my fellow panelists. I've heard this call for being radical, going to try and do the difference to get our hands dirty. I totally agree with that. And I have to say that even though it seems very institutional, always wearing nice ties and dresses for receptions, city diplomacy, being a part of diplomacy, is doing this kind of job. And we can really observe this change happening right now. We don't really know the final direction that is taking, but this is definitely happening as we speak. So I know it's a little bit counterintuitive to talk about fracture, to talk about cleavages at socio-economical level and refer it to some very institutional settings. But, well, I think that we can really identify this change. And this despite the fact that cities have always been, at least since 1648, that date that might remind you something, at the edge, at the corner, you know, of the international relations. And the second point is, in fact, that basically the international relations realm is a realm where you find surely collaboration, but also a lot of competitions. And cities are not deprived of this competition, unfortunately. We know that cities are competing to be the smartest, the most global, the more creative, the more innovative, and so on. So these are two elements that are coexisting. But parallelly, as the question highlighted, there have been a series of collaborative tools that have been put in place, those at both bilateral and multilateral level. And the socio-economical as well as the ecological crisis are truly at the center of this kind of tools that have been developed. And in fact, those tools have revealed numerous times to be more effective than the tools put in place by nation states. Well, there are two reasons for that, and one is maybe a negative reason. In fact, that cities do not have the tools and therefore do not have the goals to impose their will over other international actors. They simply can't, you know. And the second point is what we are experiencing right now is the advent of the new type of city diplomacy, this international action of cities, which now has two features. One, locally, is participatory, is multi-stakeholder, and we find many common points in what we have been saying right now, also in the difficulties in implementing that, of course. And internationally speaking, it's partnership-oriented, so the goal of collaborating for the mutual benefit. So, but enough with theory, I want to give you a few examples, just two examples, one coming from here, from Milan, and the other one coming from far away, from Sahel in Africa, but with important possible impact here in Milan and Europe in general. So, starting from Milan, we know that our city has been the first, well, I'm from Milan, sorry. Our city has been the first one to, first in Europe and in Western world to be deeply hit by COVID, of course. This has engendered a series of risks in deepening those socio-economical fracture, of course. We all know that COVID is hitting harder the people that were already suffering. And, well, the city of Milan, the municipal government, has put in place a participatory methodology of basically collaborating, coordinating, and enhancing both the public and the private charitable institutions working to cope with this crisis, socio-economical crisis. You may have seen the photo from the beautiful courtyard of Palazzo Marino, the town hall here in Paris, with all the different NGOs, associations uniting in order to map the need in the city and act together. So, well, this is, of course, something very positive for the city, but through city diplomacy, through bilateral networks, bilateral relationships and city networks, such as Eurocities or C40, the city of Milan has been able to share this practice with hundreds, if not thousands, of cities that have benefited and adapted, of course, to their need. While, of course, rising the international reputation of Milan as a city which is innovative but also truly human-centered. The second example actually comes from Sahel. As I told you, it's a region where you have a very complex cleavages superposed. You have, of course, the religious one with jihadist groups. You have different ethnicities that have created their own self-defense groups that they fight each other. What happens there? Well, on one side, you have many city networks, and I'm collaborating with one which is called International Association of Francophone Mayors, that as we speak, they are currently putting in place a series of projects of education, infrastructure, women and children rights, training for municipal officers to support local governments in these difficult areas. But those local governments, including small villages, have been able to innovate and find solutions to this very complex region where states focus on the military. They have been focusing on the cleavages, on the socio-economical cleavages. And well, they have been able to convene and mediate the different parties fighting each other, basically with the message of interdependence. So how much each group fighting each other need each other to survive, to feed their family, you know? And this is something that has proved valuable and is giving an important lesson to all cities, and unfortunately this means all cities in the world that have some level of resentment, hate speech, racism, and xenophobia. Mediation based on interdependence. Well, these are just two examples, and I come to my conclusions, of this growing awareness of cities themselves and the other actors of how important city-to-city collaboration is. And this is fueling a debate on the future of city diplomacy, because now, as I said, cities are still at the margin. But I come from 3 days of talks in Geneva at the United Nations, where we are trying to explore with the different regional commissions of the UN how cities can play a bolder role. And there is this need, which is more and more understood by the international community, that in order to fully deploy the more inclusive multilateralism that has been identified by the United Nations as the key to solve the current biggest challenges, transnational challenges of our time, inequalities, climate change, violent extremism, digital transition, and so on, there is really a need to redefine, empower the role of cities on the international stage. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So now, just one question for all of you. If you just very quick dialogue and have your say about this issue, because each of you stressed the importance of one aspect. I'd like to ask you, how is it possible to take into consideration all the aspects you mentioned? So access to housing, citizen-city relationship, the social fracture, and city diplomacy. So what kind of governance we need to take into account all these aspects? Is it and how difficult, how hard it is, how far we are from the objective, the goal, to reach the goal? Please.
Shall I start?
Yeah, yes, sure. Go.
Well, first of all, I think this conversation was very interesting because although we were all looking from very different perspectives, I think all together we are coming to the point I was trying to make on the transformative meta-governance infrastructures. Because I think participatory practices are very important, democratic engagement is very important, getting our hands dirty, very important. I absolutely agree with the activist approach. However, without this meta infrastructure that enables and links these interactions, everything, as you were referring to also to my colleagues' work, will stay as niches and slowly disappear. I've seen similar issues in different parts of the world. For example, my research in Canada also showed that very strong community engagements disappear when the funding is over. I mean, everything comes down at the end to have people who can engage and continue the work and transform the learning practices to the next point in the city. So for that, I think we need a strong regulatory perspective, a vision, and I would say maybe being radical here, following Massimo's suggestion. Although I don't think that I will sound very radical. I think we need planning, strong planning dynamics back within metropolitan regions. Thanks. I will stop here.
The institutional technique for improving governance in most of Italian cities is adding new levels. Layering is the term we use in political analysis, layering. It is when you add a new tool, an instrument, a level, but this doesn't imply that you modify or even evaluate or transform the existing ones. So, of course, the impact cannot be so big, so relevant. Most of collaborative governance in our cities is layering. Okay, this is a political style. So I do participation. I am a very interactive urban government, but this doesn't mean that I change the other robust policies that I usually do, or the way by which I act, and I define problems and solve problems and so on. Now, during the 19th, in the United States, there was a very interesting debate on collaborative governance, and they have understood that the function of the urban government was changed, not because the urban government take care of the interaction between citizens and government institutions. That was, how to say, an old thing. But because they tried to facilitate the self-organizing of people. the empowering, no, of civic and the local communities. But it was 30 years ago. They were not debating theoretically, no? No, they were analyzing practices, institutional and social practices. Now, in Italy, we are emphasizing the collaborative governance as the new way of governance. And again, I'm in doubt. But probably this is what we are experimenting. Okay, this is okay. I mean, it's okay, but it is not relevant for changing things.
Yeah, so I want to say two things. One is what I meant by getting our hands dirty was directed toward public universities, philanthropy organizations, that they need to get their hands dirty because activists already have those hands dirty. And they're getting dirtier and dirtier. And we need to think how the support make them transformative enough. And I think what I mean by that is very close to what the first speaker explains as meta-government. I mean, what these meta-government structures look like, it's up for discussion, I think, during the table. I also want to say about this collaborative relationship between the civics and institutions. We are experimenting, and in my own work, what is the most interesting aspect, I think, that when, let's call it participation, sometimes in the literature we call it in a different way, we call it, social mobilization, movement for co-production, just raising the hell out of what's going on because you're hurting us, referring, the message coming from the bottom to power brokers. The most genuine processes are loudly and clear asking institutions to be institutions, period. They, this collaborative pact requires work, time, energy, competence. Citizens are citizens and they're paying their taxes. And what is ironically, that happened to me in the United States as well. I mean, I work with, a public housing community. They were facing demolition because, United States wants to get rid of their public housing complexes. They were asking, no, we want to be in public housing because, I have 4 children. I'm a single mother. I cannot work. I cannot afford whatever social housing alternative solution you're proposing to me. So yes, we are experimenting, but I think we need to be very critical about the way we are framing collaboration between institutions and citizens. And we need to get to the bottom of what this collaboration looks like so that we avoid layering. Because when citizens have a problem, they don't care which department of the city has the responsibility to deal with that problem. And there's a huge conversation in Europe about the one-stop shops. The fact that, there's money out there, we need to make places where institutions, you have one door, you can walk into the door and, say, this is my problem, what's out there that solves my problem? And I think that's an interesting perspective that might help this layering issue. Sorry, maybe it was too long. Okay.
Well, I would like to add a focus on the specific moment we're living now as the pandemic hopefully is fading down. Well, we have seen that there is a political cost for institutions to deeply engage in solving those crises. This is costly, first of all. And I'm talking about both socio-economical and ecological crises. And the pandemic has shown us, on one side, the interconnectedness, the unity of urban communities, well, national communities in general, but especially those urban communities. It's pointless to have, gated communities with luxury facilities when actually we are a whole human community and the pandemic, the virus, has taught us that. And well, at the same time, the fact that we are destroying biodiversity has possibly created the very origin of this virus. So there is definitely a good moment to take bold actions from the institutional point of view. Well, I think I just want to point out two ways this can be done, to try to be a little bit encouraging. This is possible from my point of view. The first thing is communication, of course. There has to be redrawn the way institutions speak with citizens. And this means that civil servants have to be trained in doing that. There is so little training to civil servants on how to be collaborative. This is done by the goodwill of many wonderful civil servants in Italy and everywhere, but really need this to be trained. And vulgarization, mayors, ministers, head of governments and head of states had to learn how to draw this change, how to create a new narrative that, by the way, should, in my opinion, leave on the side this sort of disastrous idea of going toward distraction, which have proven not so effective after all. And the second point, well, to reconnect to my view of interconnectedness, the international city networks are doing so well. There are so many. But just for the environment, there are around more than 50 networks now working on the environment, each one with their own methodology. There are dozens working on social cleavages, and so on. So, in order for this to be effective, I think there truly is a need to standardize those methodologies, participatory and partner-oriented, as I said. And this sort of standardization and spread not only to the big global cities like Milan that are on the forefront of this change, but also to the whole urban and the connection between the urban and rural territories. This is the key. For that, I truly believe, I mean, this is what I urge the United Nations to do, convene this kind of initiative. The European Union should do this as well, and the nation states should start thinking really about opening the wallet and covering the cost for doing this participatory approach, which is very expensive. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your enlightening suggestion and also call to action. You mix very well thoughts and practice, and that's what we need to take into consideration, how to mix the two things. So I'd like to thank our guests and also the public who followed the event from remotely and in presence here from Feltrinelli Foundation. And before signing off, I remind you that at 4 p.m., at 10 past 4 p.m., you can follow live the conversation between Gabriele Pasqui and Eric Klinkenberg on the Foundation channels. And from 6 p.m., you can follow the official opening of Broken City Feltrinelli Camp, both remotely and in person here. Thank you so much. See you later. Bye. Thank you.